Welcome to Marketers Talking Marketing.
Welcome to another episode of Marketers Talking, where we're matching today, which was not coordinated, but should be a sign of a good show. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
So Jim Heininger, based in Chicago. I've had about 4 decades of experience in marketing and communications, and currently have a firm which specializes in rebranding that helps organizations through that end-to-end process of a brand transformation.
That's such an interesting niche, I think, because you must get some interesting clients who come to you either having realized that they need to rebrand, or maybe there's some internal strife, I would imagine, sometimes too, on what the brand should be.
Yeah, one of the very first conversations that we have with folks that contact us is defining what they think is a rebrand, because the term is used pretty broadly. And we kind of say there's 3 ways to approach it. There's a refresh, which is the visual makeover of your brand. Perhaps it's a new logo, new color palette that's reflected in website and materials. That's a visual makeover. A repositioning is when you need to present yourself differently to the market, either to capture a new, customer segment or to get away from the way you've been perceived. That's a repositioning. That involves a lot of refreshing, but it doesn't involve changing your name and standing up an entirely new brand. Rebranding is the whole package. It's a new name. It's a whole new proposition that you're taking to the marketplace. It's a repositioning of your products or services and the refresh of a new visual identity as well, too. We try to help them sort through what is it that they really need to do at this point in time, so that they're going down the right path and don't find themselves taking on too aggressive of an effort.
Yeah, that seems like such a massive lift to do a full rebrand.
It's part of what is so challenging for organizations, especially ones that have been around for decades, is you're letting go of the past and you're having to reach out and try to embrace a new future. That can be difficult for people because their success has been built upon what they've done in the past, and to let go and kind of reach on that trapeze bar for something new can be really challenging for people. And so it's a little bit of a therapist role at times, really leaning into their aspirations of where they're wanting to go and where they're wanting to take their company, and how necessary it is for them to continue to grow on the path that they want.
Do you find that's almost more challenging, is getting everyone aligned on what they want to do and who they are and who they're becoming?
Yeah, and it's actually aligning the whole organization behind the effort too. And research that we've done, that was the number one challenge or obstacle that people ran into that had rebranded, was aligning the organization behind it. Because to do it right, you really need to change the culture of the organization to support that new brand promise. And you have to have the leadership of all the different departments on the team, understanding why you're doing this, embracing the new brand and the promise, so that they can bring their teams along to be able to deliver it to the customer, which is the end goal.
Yeah. So you probably work a lot then also with change management.
In my own personal career, I grew up in the PR industry, working for some of the big agencies and handling the strategic communication side of things. I did an interesting stint at McDonald's where I went in as kind of a hired gun to help with a number of different kind of corporate reputation issues that they were facing at the time that needed to be resolved to improve their scores and to kind of unleash their reputation in some of these areas. And I got in, and we were thinking we could solve it with communications, and we couldn't. It required change management, which was kind of an emerging discipline at the time. So I studied up on it. I got really familiar with some of the kind of new thinking of how to use change within an organization, and have kept that with me ever since. So when we launched the brand, the rebranding experts, that was a key component of it, is how do you help change the organization to where you're needing to go?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was speaking to a CRO a couple weeks ago, and he said the number one thing he does when he goes into a new organization, and the most critical thing is just getting everyone on the same page. with the same sales pitch, same materials. He's like, people think that there's like, it's a different methodology, this and that. He's like, no, my like most critical job is just making sure everyone is saying the exact same thing.
Yeah, and a great application of that in the work that we do is we start out working with the leadership. They all have a different definition of what a brand is. And so if you're talking about changing the brand of the organization and you've got 19 different definitions or versions or interpretations of what that brand is, you're going to find yourself getting into the process and it's going to get really cumbersome. So we start out with, what is a brand? What is our brand? What is an ideal brand? What's the brand we're striving for, to get that leadership on the same page, so that then they can start to represent that within the organization, but also as you're making decisions and making sure that everybody in the organization is aligned. They're not aligned around what a brand is. And all of a sudden you're going to find yourself taking off in a lot of different directions.
Yeah. Do you find that's like the number one spot that things can go wrong when people are trying to go through this massive effort?
That first couple months of the engagement, people are very eager to rush into, we want to rename it. What's the new name? What's the creative process? We're getting there and so forth. And we'll say, we've got some steps we're going to go through here to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of how we define a brand and what we're trying to achieve out of this rebranding effort, and how everybody needs to be at this table so that we come across with a common view of it. And then let's start the process. So and people are very impatient. They really want to get going. They want to get this done fast because they want to start to benefit from the results of it. We'll keep saying we have to follow the process, or otherwise you're going to find yourself creating more work on differing opinions, and it'll end up taking longer as a result of those things that you don't want.
Yeah, people love the output. They just want to, they want to get there. Are there other steps? So we talk about doing the work to get to that to get ready for that output. Are there other steps that people might not be thinking about that go into a total rebrand?
So changing your name is a major lift. And so not only do you want to spend the time and the energy in terms of the creative process of determining what's that essence of our new brand that we want illustrated in our name, and what kind of meaning do we want to pack into that new name. But then you've got this whole challenge out there, which is called trademarking. And, as we like to say, every word in the English language has been used by multiple people already. And so it is a challenge to come up with ways to express that brand promise that haven't already been trademarked by somebody else. And every company wants to call themselves Aspire, or some word that lifts people up in their feeling about them. Can't do it. It's been taken, been used. So controlling that creative energy and that desire for what they want with reality can be a challenge. And what we'll show them is how many trademarks are submitted every year. I think it's over 1 million to the USPTO.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And how, the review of name options on already trademarked use of those is a step that has to happen, or you're going to fall in love with a name and we're going to have to come back and tell you, whoops, can't go there. So we don't want to do that. We want to take lists of name options and start to run it through that filter so that we can immediately say, well, there's maybe a possibility of this one, but here's the roadblocks that it faces, or this name is free and clear. This looks really good that we can roll ahead with. And key to that is, when we get down to those couple options, is having the trademark attorney part of the process so that they can run a thorough search of that name and be able to come back with a percentage probability that it'll get approval by the USPTO. Because if it's not a high level of confidence in it, let's don't go there. Because, and here's the other dynamic. It takes a year to get a new trademark application reviewed and approved by the USPTO.
Wow.
So here you've got a CEO and leadership who were super eager to get this process rolling and get the new name and get it launched. and you've got this year approval process that you have to go through to get a new name trademarked. What that means is you have to have like 99% confidence that that new name will be approved so that you can confidently submit your application and start the process of updating all your branded assets and getting your new marketing campaign ready to go and getting your training for your employees ready so that you can have them supporting the new brand. And you will launch that new brand before it's even approved by the USP.
Okay. I was just about to ask that if you had to wait for it.
No, most companies will not.
Yeah.
Because they are so eager to get through this. They made the commitment and now they want to get going on it. And so you will more than likely, if you have that super high level of confidence, launch your new brand before you get trademark approval on it. So
have you seen like really public brands that have done that with a rebrand and then knock on approval? And what do they do in those situations?
Yeah, luckily it's none of our clients because we won't let them do it. But you occasionally see in news reports where there is a company who has changed their name and now they are getting cease and desist letters from somebody who's already in that space. And I want to say you shouldn't have gone there in the first place. You shouldn't have done it. You should definitely have kind of a risk management plan if that happens as to what you will do. And oftentimes they have to go back and do a modification to that name. What I've seen mostly is they modify the name in a way that the original owner of it won't protest it anymore. Do that because if you've produced signage or vehicles that are have a brand name on the side of it, whatever business you're in, that gets expensive.
Yeah, well, and I'd imagine also the cost of litigation to defend your use of the trademark. We actually got a cease and desist. We had a page on our website where we were talking about some of our AI incubator ideas, and the descriptor for one of them was the name of a trademark company, and it's got Copilot in it. And so they sent us a cease and desist, and we're like, you cannot, like, if you're going to use this, we need to talk about how you can use it. It doesn't infringe upon our rights. And it's like Microsoft just named their product your exact company name. And they're like, we know, we have to sue them now. It's like, whoa. Well, and if you're small, depending on how much you have for reserves, like that can be really costly.
Yeah. And so major corporations subscribe to services that monitor new trademark applications. And if something pops up that they say is within our space of protection, they've got a process in place. Their legal department will send out cease and desist and so forth. It's only the big guys that can afford to do that. They've got a lot invested in their brand, so they're very robust kind of in terms of the protection of it. Most organizations don't. So there's a time period with which you can protest or you can file a complaint after a new brand is approved. If you miss that, then you have to live with that brand moving forward.
Oh, interesting. I always wonder, when it comes to domains, I feel like we're almost exhausting all the .coms. We're seeing a ton of new like TLDs released. And there's definitely a couple brands that when I Google their name, I'll see 5 or 6 different variations of like, try this, say this, this.ai, whatever it is. Do you think are you seeing that becoming an issue at all?
Yeah, your goal is always to have an exact match domain, URL. You strive for that. And that's one of the things that we will, as we're narrowing name options down to finalists, is we'll always present, here's what the domain, kind of landscape looks like, because that probably will factor into leadership's final decision. If it can't get an exact domain and they don't like the options, they may say, let's back away from that particular name. But yeah, you have to get creative with domains, just as you do in naming, and certainly you want to buy up everything surrounding it as well too, so that you can redirect it to your site if it's misspellings, if it's, other interpretations of the name. So that's an increasingly important consideration in a new name as well.
How long does it typically take a client to settle on that updated name?
So if we're doing our job right, we're narrowing it down to a few options and then you get the legal perspective on it, you get the domain perspective on it, and you go out and you do some consumer research testing as well, so that you bring back all those perspectives, and usually one of the names comes out stronger across all three of those measures, and they are able to do it. That's, we're talking about a couple months here in that final runway of the name selection. And then if you have to go to a board to approve it or something like that, you got to factor in that timing as well.
Yeah. So once the name is settled on and everyone's aligned, what's the next step that someone takes?
So that's when you should have geared up, ready to go. What your implementation plan is for moving forward. So usually you have a logo or a visual identity that is either part of that name decision or immediately follows. Okay, so what are our visual identity options with this particular name now? So that's a key piece that has to be resolved, because that goes into every single branded asset that you have that needs to be updated as a result. So way early in the process, we lead clients through a audit of all their branded assets, so they can identify as hopefully every single piece that has their brand visual identity on it, that knows that it needs to be updated. And then you figure out what's the timeline production on that, so that your runway to launch is determined by what assets you need to update. So with most organizations, we're working with a financial institution right now. Well, they've got signs on banks that have to be updated. So that's probably about a 6 to 8 month time frame. And they've got credit and debit cards that they need to update and read. Those, as we looked at what are the longest term branded assets that they need to update, those are the two that really are driving launch date, because they want to be able to come out with a bang that, your credit card is kind of your closest personal connection to your bank, so if that's not updated, they're telling you, here's our new name and our new brand promise, and you've got an old credit card or debit card, it doesn't connect. So you want those as soon after launch as possible in the hands of your customers. So there's a huge kind of calculation of what is our runway of implementation here that we need to work against, and it's based upon those longest production times.
Yeah. So it sounds like, I would imagine some people coming in wanting to do a rebrand tomorrow, but really it's like a year plus process.
So usually they want it done 6 months. They always want it done that fiscal year. And we lay out, here's what it's going to take to do that. And most often they come back and say, okay, we're willing to stretch it out a little bit further. I will tell you, I've never met a rebranding that went off on the initial expected date that a client wanted. And it has to be because as they get into it and they start to get excited and they see the potential that it's going to have for their business, they'll say, let's slow it down so that we can make sure this is included as well too. Really want, we had one CEO who said, I'm so excited about this. I want to bring everybody from our company. So they were about from maybe 4 or 5 states and several hundred people, wanted to bring them all in to launch it together for them to see it and get a reveal in front of the entire employee base. Okay, so that now required extra timing. So she was willing to delay it so that she could do that kind of reveal that she wanted. So it tends to stretch longer than what people normally think that they can get it done in.
Yeah. I mean, I would just imagine it's hard to scope everything initially.
Well, that's where we actually have built a methodology and a process that has captured all of that, so that we're able to sit down with each client and say, here's the totality of what a rebranding can include. Are there any of these that that don't represent the work that you do or that you don't need to worry about? We have a list of from every rebranding that we've done, everything that companies need to update that they might not think about, or if they ask their own people, they might not think about. We've got it on a list to make sure that it's being reflected.
Awesome. When someone's thinking about a rebrand, are there cases you see where they will come to you and it's not a fit?
Not a fit in terms
that they shouldn't do where someone may come. Let me rephrase that question. Do you find that sometimes people come and say, I need a rebrand, and then you start going through the process and you realize, well, really, it's just maybe you need a refresh, not this full overhaul?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So normally it's and we have a template of building a rebranding business case that asks 10 to 12 questions that really zone in on why are you feeling you need to change, and that's where we'll normally spot if there's what's wrong with their current brand that where the name isn't effective, or that it's holding them back, or it tends to be that their aspirations of where they're wanting to take the company, their current brand isn't reflecting that. And then you can say, okay, that involves a name change. Are you ready for a name change? Oh, okay, yes. So it's, by asking the right questions up front, figuring out what's the problem we're trying to solve really helps you from the beginning determine if that full rescale is rebranding is needed, or if you can accomplish it through just a refresh.
Awesome. Do you have examples of really good rebrands that companies have gone through that you can share with the audience?
So, there's examples of ones that I think are just phenomenal. And these aren't ones that we've worked on, but I think they really reflect the potential of what a rebranding can do. And one of them is an example right here in Chicago. It was the Chicago, the Rehabilitative Institute. It's world renowned as being a place that can help in terms of, really physical challenges that people are needing to recover from. We get accidents. We have a lot of famous people that come there that are trying to restore their abilities. And, but the way it was named, the Chicago Rehabilitation Institute, is we're going to rehab you to get to where you want to be. Well, they had a major donor who was giving money that would allow them to reshape the way they serve their patients and really reorganize the model. And they named it the Ability Lab. And so now it's not about rehabilitation, which kind of says you've got work that needs to be done, it's about giving you ability. And it's a much more aspirational name. It better frames up the way this team works together to be able to try to bring that person to their full potential. So I think that's a fabulous one. There was work done with Sunbank and BBT something bank down in the South, and they rebranded it as Truist. And it was really a very clever kind of way of representing the name that was uplifting. And there you had a merger of two organizations where you weren't fighting for which of the brands we're going to keep and ours is better, yours isn't. They came up with a new brand themselves that kind of allowed them to correct what those previous brands didn't do, which was give them a very aspirational kind of positioning. So those are a couple of good ones. Obviously, the worst one is X from Twitter. X, everybody knows that. He supports that. And
Yeah.
Through that one.
Well, and it always boggles my mind, too, that Twitter rebranded to X because Elon Musk, I think, then named the AI X. There's something that's X.AI, but X was a company that worked in the AI space for like a decade ahead of Twitter becoming X. And so they just completely were like, we don't care that someone else exists, that they have the domain, that they're doing similar work. We don't care. We're still going to do it. Yeah. And it was,
everything
as someone
was
who,
wrong about that rebranding.
Yeah.
What not to do.
I think when your CEO walks in with a sink on their first day, there might be a sign that legal's not involved in a lot of decisions being made. Do you find when mergers happen or acquisitions, that's like one of the big catalysts for triggering a rebrand?
Yeah, that's usually, I think it's the number one motivator behind a rebranding, and that's because you have to figure out which brand you're going to move forward with, or you're going to create a new brand. And it's an important leadership decision too, because it's not just the brand, it's the companies. And what are we doing to bring these companies together? We had an example of a player in the hospitality industry, and there were 3 companies that were being merged together. They were all in the same space of providing like linens to the hospitality industry, bed sheets and robes and tablecloths and all that kind of stuff. And the leadership said, not only do we not want to choose any of our names because they're really not that strong of brand names, but we want to use it as a lift to be able to incorporate any other acquisitions that we make. So take us up to a higher level, make it a neutral name that none of our legacy companies, nobody's going to argue over or fight, to say which should have been us, but give us room to grow as we take on more acquisitions as well too. And since private equity is increasingly a big player and piece of any kind of mergers and acquisitions, that's what their goal is. They want elasticity in that name so that they can continue to bolt on other acquisitions under that new brand name. So that's one of the key drivers from their perspective too.
Is there a way that they're measuring like the value or how much that new name is worth compared to the old ones?
It's hard to do, until you've been out in the marketplace with it for a while, and given it a couple of years to settle in. A lot of organizations don't invest the resources in measuring their brand value in the way that they could or should. And so they don't have those kind of insights to be able to go back and say, look, we moved from this to this as a result of it. It's an unfortunate part of a lot of marketing organizations is that it's all about driving customer acquisition and growth and not their brand value.
Yeah, it's so weird. I feel like a lot of orgs almost over index on measuring on the customer acquisition side, and they want like metrics on every little step. And then on brand, they're like, it's a vibe, it's a feeling, we can't measure. And it's like, well, you can do things to measure it. Yeah. You're just choosing not to. And then you're over measuring the stuff that's easy to measure, instead of kind of balancing it out. Yeah. Are there metrics that clients typically look at when they're going through rebrand to see if it's getting adopted or if it's like successful or not?
You can build in both internal and external. You want to make sure that you're measuring our employees' ability to tell the new brand story. If you're changing the customer experience, which you should be, because if you've got a new brand promise, there should be a new customer experience that supports that. So is that being delivered effectively, in however it's being measured? And you got all your website measurements, in terms of, visits to the site and the interaction with the site and so forth. When you get to awareness in the customer and the public, you have to have a good baseline before you start out as to what people think your current brand is, and then the ability to measure against that. A lot of people are too eager to get going on the new brand that they won't spend the money on that baseline. They're just like, let's get going. We know it's going to be better. We know it's going to be, So then you're relying on more kind of quick turn evaluations among your customer base, surveys, on what their perceptions are of your brands pre and post, and how it's, you got to put in place some measures of, from a like, let's say you're in the B2B space, did that new customer acquisition, how much was our new brand or positioning influencing their decision to do work with us, that kind of thing. But yeah, you all in, and it's a challenge sometimes, because if a company is not super dedicated to research, they have a hard time understanding why do we now need to measure these new brand variables as well too. So continue to encourage them.
There was a Demand Base did a rebrand, and I'll link it in the show notes below. And I hated it. I was like, these colors are ugly. It looks like like they have a Mucinex type colors. And I hated it so much. And I was telling our account manager that. And she said, actually, we did a ton of research and we found that these colors really resonate with people between like 20 and 28. So I think you don't like it because you're in your 30s. And I was like, what? And then I was like, well, hold on. I hated it. I was very vocal.
Oh.
And so then I started talking to my team about it, who's a lot of people who are in like their mid 20s. And they were like, yeah, no, I think it looks really good. Like, I really like it. And I was like, oh my God, it's me. They're not targeting me. They're trying to target a different group. But I went from hating it and being like, they made a bad decision to thinking, okay,
Accept it.
I don't like it because I'm not their target audience, but clearly like they did a ton of research. They shared some of it. And I was like, all right, never mind. I guess you guys did make a good decision. I just don't like it.
Yeah. What kind of an interesting observation that we've had is we monitor on a daily basis announcements of rebranding. It's just because we're curious to see who's rebranding, why, how they position it, what the strategy is, just to continually learn and gather best practices as well for clients. Who rebrands more than anybody, just based on casual observation? Marketing and advertising agencies. Anybody are willing to change their name, change their positioning, all new visual identity and so forth. And it's because I think we all understand the importance of a brand and the power of a brand. And if your brand's not working, I think we're the ones that are most likely to say we need to make a change and willing to invest in it and to do it right. So I get a kick out of it. It's constant, and there's now a little bit of a trend, and one of the big PR agency giants was Burson Marsteller, and then they merged with another one. They went back to Burson today. They just announced it at Cannes, over in France at Cannes, to go back to their original name, kind of in what we call a rebranding rebound, or boomerang almost, to go back to what they found to be the core strength of equity of their brand. So yeah, we're the biggest supporters of rebranding.
Do you know when they changed out of the original name? Was it quite a while ago?
Yeah, so they, like agencies, there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and then you're trying to mash up names, that you think have the strongest equities and so forth. So they were Burson Marsteller for a long time, and then they became Burson Strategies, or it's a whole mix of things where over the last maybe 15 years, they were trying to leverage the greatest strengths of all their acquisitions and so forth. And let's go back to the name that has the most power to it.
Yeah, that's an interesting stat. It doesn't surprise me too, because I feel like marketers love doing marketing. So they're like, I'm actually guilty of that for year 2 of Marketers Talking. Originally, it was Marketers Talking Marketing. And then I was like, well, I could just do Marketers Talking and then have subcategories. And then I was like, well, I should do a new logo then. And I was like, well, maybe I should also do a new color palette. And then next thing I knew, I redid the entire like visual identity and the name and the domain and the website. And so I'm actually guilty of that too. Marketers love consuming their own work.
We do.
Yeah. Can I ask, if a company is thinking about doing a complete rebranding, how much should they plan on spending?
Ooh, good question. So we put it into 2 buckets because we try to help clients understand what the investment's going to be. Actually, 3 buckets. There's the agency costs, so there's if you bring in an outside agency such as ourselves, here's what the costs are going to be to go through this process, through the creative process and through the internal implementation and so forth. Depending upon how much support that they need, that can run from $75,000 to several $100,000 to be able to go through that whole end to end. The biggest cost that comes into play is branded assets. So if you are a professional services firm and your product is people and they're giving counseling, you don't have many branded assets to update. You've got a website, you got materials, some swag, that kind of stuff. If you're an airline, you got to rebrand your planes, your gates, all your service equipments, your vehicles. That's a hugely costly effort, which is why one of the very first things that we do is say, let's audit everything so that you can have a sense early on what the cost of updating all this is going to be. So that's the kind of unpredictable piece, but we know to address it early on so that they can gain that insight. The third piece of it is the people costs. So getting through this process requires a lot of engagement from your people internally. Your leadership have to be actively engaged. Your department managers are going to have a role in terms of engaging their workforces and getting it introduced. Brand training among all the employees, new customer experience training, and so forth. So that we always say, please factor in how much time your people are going to need to spend on this, because that's somewhat pulling them away from their day-to-day business. And you got to either get resources to be able to implement that, or make sure you're calculating that into your timeline. So, it really, those are the kind of the three costs that comes down to it. And people tend to get a little bit more excited as they get into the process and want to start spending more money because they see the potential of it. So we're just going to do a simple little launch internally where we'll do department meetings and introduce them to it and so forth. And all of a sudden the CEO is like, no, I want to bring in all our employees, or we're going to do a global virtual meeting. And I want prizes given out, and everybody gets a swag bag, shipped to their home or whatever it is. That's where your costs start to increase.
Oh, yeah. I think everyone who's ever bought and sent swag to employees internally, especially if you have a global workforce, I have never had a conversation with someone when doing this where they were even remotely close to estimating the cost properly. And you're like, yeah, we can get a pen is 10 cents a pen. Oh, but you're shipping it to Bolivia. That's going to be $50. So they're like, well, we might as well make it worth it. Let's add more stuff in. Okay, now, it's the whole package is maybe $100 worth of swag per employee, but your shipping costs are going to double it. Then you need packaging for it, and you can do branded boxes, and that can skyrocket so fast. But it also goes really far with employees.
Yep. Because one of the things we tell people is you've got to ask employees to get rid of their old stuff. So you want to make as much of that old brand disappear, because you don't want to have dueling, coffee mugs, in your conference room when a client comes to, for a meeting, and all of a sudden you go, well, which coffee cup, which brand are you going to get? So we say to people, you need to schedule clear out days where you're asking people to get rid of old materials, old swag, please don't keep it around or be wearing it or using it. Go all in on our new brand.
I can't remember what company it was, but I read a report of a company that did that, where they had their new brand coming out. And so they'd asked all their employees to donate all of their old swag, all their old jackets and stuff to different shelters, or, Goodwill or St. Vincent or whatever the local kind of reused place was. But they had to remove the logos first.
Yeah.
And that became a big thing because a lot of people didn't.
Yeah.
They're just like, I don't know how to do this. And so all of a sudden, they're flooded with all this branded material that maybe they do or don't want.
Yeah.
And your brand now is kind of getting wore by a lot of people outside your organization.
Right. And kind of watered down, and then it just creates confusion. Yeah. That's a tough one, because, you obviously spend a lot of money on those items too, and you want to be responsible in terms of how you're discarding them or a new life.
A lot of Patagonia vests.
There will be.
Flying around. Well, Jim, thank you so much for, sharing your insight and time. If people want to learn more about you or connect, where do they go?
So come to rebrandingexperts.com.
Great domain.
Yeah. Well, and that, quite honestly, when we launched the firm, we did our own research as to what what were companies looking for? And it was they're looking for a rebranding expert or specialist. Boom. There's the name of the term. So maybe someday we'll rebrand when we don't need that anymore. But for now, we want the SEO lift.
I mean, that's why this is Marketers Talking.
There you go.
It's like my first agency was some growth agency. Because I was like, what are people going to look for? You know, there's nothing wrong with, I feel like, with an SEO optimized name.
There you go.
All right. Well, we will see everyone on the next episode.